Hello and good day everyone. Today, ang pag-uusapan natin ay all about the muscle tissue. For our learning objectives, we need to enumerate and differentiate the types of muscle tissue in the body. Discuss the characteristics of each type of muscle fibers and to determine the importance of muscle tissue in the body. So according to histological classification, meron tayong tatlong types of muscle tissue around the body. We have the skeletal muscle, the cardiac muscle, and the smooth muscle. At bawat muscle tissue type ay binubuo ng mga muscle fibers na tinatawag. So ang muscle fibers, isa-isahin natin yung mga characteristics. So ano ba yung mga characteristics ng muscle fiber? Number 1, they are elongated and oriented parallel to its direction of action. So let's identify where are the muscle fibers. So for skeletal muscle fiber, ito siya, no? So you have elongated muscle fiber and then oriented parallel to its direction of action. So meaning to say, dito sa illustration natin, meron tayong dalawang muscle fiber na naka-highlight. Isa, dalawa. Pero in total, meron tayong 4. Isa, dalawa, tatlo, 4. Now for cardiac muscle, ang mga muscle fiber niya ay nagkakaroon ng tinatawag na branching. O yung paghihiwalay from isang muscle fiber, nag-branch siya, okay, naging 2. Pagdating dito, naging 3. Next, for the smooth muscle naman, ito yung mga muscle fiber natin na tinatawag. Okay? So, number 1 characteristic, elongated and oriented parallel to its direction of action. Number 2, meron tayong specific term na ginagamit to illustrate the different parts of the muscle fiber. Like for example, kung ang cell membrane sa muscle tissue, ang tawag natin doon ay sarcolemma. For the cytoplasm naman ng muscle tissue, ang tawag natin doon ay sarcoplasm. Aside from that, makikita nyo sa bawat muscle fiber ay mayroong mga nucleus. Okay? So, ang nucleus dito ay characterized as elongated and is parallel to the long axis of the muscle fiber. So you have the nucleus for skeletal muscle fiber, nucleus for cardiac muscle fiber, and the nucleus for smooth muscle fiber. Next is according to functional classification. For functional classification, dalawa lang yan. Either voluntary or involuntary. For voluntary, it is controlled by the central nervous system. For involuntary, it contracts in response to stimulation of autonomic nervous system. So, alin sa mga muscle types ang considered as voluntary? So, for voluntary, iisa lang. This is your skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle lang ang classified as voluntary. Cardiac and smooth muscle are classified as involuntary. According to structural classification, the presence of striations. Okay? So, striations, okay, the presence of transverse or cross striation known as the dark and light bands. So, alin dito yung mga striations na tinatawag? So, we have this one and this one for the cardiac muscle. So, for structural classification under striated, you have skeletal muscle and the cardiac muscle. For the smooth muscle, there are no striations at all. Okay? So, next. So, punta naman tayo dun sa functions. So, for functions of muscle, number 1, we have movement. 2, locomotion. And 3 is for the maintenance of body posture. So let's differentiate locomotion from movement. Pag sinabing movement, ito yung paggalaw ng body part mo. Pero pag sinabing locomotion, the entire body of organism moves from one place to another. Like for example, yung pagtaas ng aking kamay, kaliwang kamay, that is an example of movement. Paggalaw ng aking mga mata, from left to right, yan ay example ng movement. Yung pagtakbo mula dito sa San Fernando hanggang Angeles, that is considered as your locomotion. Okay? So again, pag movement, only the body parts move. But when we say locomotion, the entire body of organism move from one place to another. Okay? So sana malinaw tayo dun, ha? Locomotion and movement. And also for the maintenance of the body posture. Gaya nga ng sinabi ko, ang sagwa naman kung wala tayong mga muscle, diba? Puro buto or buto agad. Okay? So your muscle maintains the body posture. Okay? Next, simulan na natin yung unang type ng skeletal muscle. So, tingin kayo dito sa figure 10-2. Paano ba nade-develop ang skeletal muscle? So, the skeletal muscle begins to differentiate when the mesenchymal cells called myoblasts. So, myoblasts are the mesenchymal cells. So, these myoblasts, mag-fuse yan sila or mag-join together along with other myoblasts to form your myotubules. Okay? So these myotubules synthesize the proteins to make up myofilaments and gradually begin to show cross striations. Kasi isa nga yan sa mga characteristic ng muscle fiber ng skeletal muscle. Merong striations. Okay? So these myotubules will then be differentiated into muscle fiber. Okay? So meron na tayong skeletal muscle fiber. Now, ano naman tong satellite cell na to? Itong satellite cell na to, ito ay myoblast population or part of myoblast population that does not fuse and differentiate. No? So, anong ginagawa or function ng satellite cell? So, these satellite cells are attached to the muscle fiber wherein it proliferate and produce new muscle fibers following muscle injury. So kapag ka nagkaroon ng muscle injury, si satellite cell yung isa sa mga nagre-respond to produce new muscle fibers, no? To compensate dun sa mga nasira or nawalang muscle fiber during muscle injury. Okay? So, dito naman tayo sa pinaka-right na image. So, ito ay example ng iyong skeletal muscle fiber. Okay? So, elongated. You have elongated nucleus. Right? So, i-characterize natin isa-isa. So, skeletal muscle, again, it is striated and under voluntary movement. Meaning to say, ito ay nakokontrol ng ating utak or the central nervous system. It forms the main bulk of the body musculature. So, most of our muscles are considered as skeletal muscle. Generally attached to the bone, except for the intrinsic muscles of the tongue, upper esophagus, and some of the facial expression muscles. So let's talk about the skeletal muscle fiber. Focus kayo dito, no? So this is your skeletal muscle fiber. Sabi dito, it is characterized as a long, cylindrical, and multinucleated cells. Multinucleated. Ayan. So, ito yung isang strand ng ating muscle fiber. As you can see, there are more than one nucleus na nakalagay dito sa, or makikita dito sa isang muscle fiber natin. That is why, tinawag siyang multinucleated. Okay? So, around 10 to 100 micrometer And also, gaya ng sinabi ko sa inyo kanina, yung muscle fiber ng skeletal muscle ay may mga satellite cells na naka-attach. Okay? So, ang function ng satellite cells, it proliferates and produce new muscle fibers following a muscle injury. Aside from that, no, merong mga cross striations. That is why it is classified as striated, no? Striated type of skeletal of muscle tissue. Yan, so may mga striations na yan. And also, the fibers appear almost equal in size. So, ito yung itsura ng isang skeletal muscle under the microscope, no? Ito yung mismong itsura ng skeletal muscle. As you can see, meron tayong 4 na muscle fiber. And kung mapapansin natin, halos equal ang kanilang lapad at yung kanilang haba. Okay? So, yan yung mga characteristics ng muscle fiber ng skeletal muscle. Okay. Aside from that, it do not branch, no? The muscle fibers do not branch. Uulitin ko, ano nga kasi yung muscle type natin na nagbabranch ang kanilang muscle fiber? That is your cardiac muscle fibers. Okay? Next, nuclei are located at the periphery or beneath the sarcolemma and may be more than 2. Okay, so ang location ng muscle fiber nuclei ng skeletal muscle ay in the periphery, dun sa gilid. Ito, yung naka-point sa arrow. Okay, sa gilid. Wala siya sa gitna, no? Nasa gilid. Okay, nasa outermost portion ng muscle fiber, paikot. Okay? So, they are multinucleated, meaning to say, maraming nucleus sa isang muscle fiber strand. Okay, next. Punta naman tayo dito sa gitna. Itong image natin or figure 10-3, organization of skeletal muscle. As we all know, skeletal muscle is composed of a lot or numerous numbers of muscle fibers, no? So, itong isang muscle na to, okay? Ito yung whole muscle na. So, i-discuss ko ngayon dito ay yung mga connective tissue covering of the skeletal muscle. So, namely, we have the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. So, i-discuss natin yan siya from the outermost layer hanggang sa innermost layer, hanggang dun sa muscle fiber. Okay? So, let's start with the epimysium. Si epimysium ay yung connective tissue layer na nagko-cover sa buong muscle. Yan. Okay? Naintindihan na? Si epimysium is a dense connective tissue surrounding the whole muscle. Ito. Ito yung buong muscle mo. Okay? Ang covering niyan ay epimysium. Ngayon, dun sa loob ng muscle, meron tayong tinatawag na bundles of muscle fibers, which we called as fascicles. Okay? So, fascicles are bundles of muscle fibers. So, sa loob ng muscle, meron tayong tinatawag na mga fascicles. So, based dito sa ating picture, ilan ang fascicle natin? Bilangin natin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 in total. Approximately 11 siya, no? So, etong fascicles na to, kapag humugot ka ng isa, may connective tissue covering yan siya. At ang tawag natin doon ay perimysium. Ito, perimysium. Perimysium is a thin septa that extend to surround each fascicles. Again, fascicles is a bundle of muscle fibers. So ngayon, huhugot ka ng isang fascicle mula dun sa muscle mo. So meron ka ng isang fascicle dito. At ang fascicle, by definition, sabi natin, it is a bundle of muscle fibers. So meaning to say, yung sa loob ng fascicle ay mga muscle fibers yan. So hugot ka ng isang muscle fiber. yung muscle fiber na to, ang connective tissue covering niya is endomysium. Endomysium. Okay? So, para to summarize, pag epimysium, whole muscle. Pag perimysium, the fascicle. And for the endomysium, the muscle fiber. Okay? So, that is the organization of skeletal muscle. Epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium. So now, let us focus dun sa muscle fiber. Ito. Tingnan nyo yung pointer ko ha. Muscle fiber. Itong muscle fiber na to, palalakihin natin sa next slide. Ayan. Ito na siya. Okay? Ulitin ko ha. Itong muscle fiber na to, palalakihin natin. Ito. Ito na siya ha. Ito. Okay? So, the diagram shows that each muscle fiber contains several parallel bundles called myofibrils. So, this is your muscle fiber. Sa loob daw niyan, no, meron pa palang maliliit na fibers or bundles, no? Ang tawag natin doon ay myofibrils. Okay? So, hugot ka ng isang myofibril from the muscle fiber. Ito yung illustration natin. Okay, so i-discuss natin isa-isa. So skeletal muscle fibers, additional characteristics. Number 1, fine longitudinal striations and cross striations are detectable and both are due to the arrangement of myofibril. So sabi ko, sa loob ng muscle fiber, meron tayong mas maliliit na mga bundles. Ang tawag pa natin doon ay myofibril. So, hugot tayo ng isang myofibril. Ayan ang itsura niya. Okay. So, longitudinal section shows heavily stained dark bands alternating with relatively plain bands are seen. So, dito sa isang myofibril, ayan, meron tayong tinatawag na dark band and the light band. Yung dark band natin are designated as A band. Asan yung A band? So, ito yung A band. Saan siya nakalocate? Ito. Itong brown. Mas brown na to. Yan. So, this is your dark band. So, aside from dark band, meron din tayong tinatawag na lighter staining bands which are designated as I band. So, nasaan yung I band natin? Ito. Itong nasa tabi lang ng A band. So, kung mapapansin niyo, alternate siya. No? So, bilangin natin kung naiintindihan natin kung nasan yung I band. Bilangin natin kung ilan ang merong I band sa myofibril na ito. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So, meron tayong 7 lighter band or what we call as I band. Bilangin naman natin yung A band. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, meron tayong 6 na A band at meron tayong 7 I band. So, ano bang meaning ng A band? Ano meaning ng I band? So, A stands for anisotrophic. Anisotrophic. They are birefringent in polarized light microscopy. Pag sinabi mo namang I band, that is isotrophic. Okay? Isotrophic band. Ulitin ko. A stands for anisotrophic. I stands for isotrophic. Okay? So, I hope na nakakasunod kayo, ha? So, sa isang muscle fiber, meron pa tayo sa loob nun ng mga tinatawag na mas maliliit na bundles na tinatawag na myofibrils. So, kung huhugot ko ng isang myofibrils from the muscle fiber, ito yung itsura niya. And it is consist of a lighter band and darker band. Ang lighter band natin is I band. Ang darker band natin is A band. Okay? So now, let's talk about the sarcomere. Based on the definition, sarcomere is the structural and functional unit of the skeletal muscle. So, nasaan ang sarcomere dito sa illustration natin? Ito po, no? Yan, yung naka-bracket na yan. Ito yung sarcomere. Kapag pinalaki natin yung sarcomere, ito yung mga components niya. I-discuss natin yan mamaya. Okay? Dapat lang natin maintindihan kung ano yung sarcomere dito sa myofibril natin. Okay? So, ito yung sarcomere. Again, your sarcomere is the structural and functional unit of the skeletal muscles. The segments of myofibrils between successive Z lines. So, ito ay isang sarcomere. Pero dahil mahaba ang ating myofibril, marami tayong sarcomere. No, paano natin malalaman ang bilang ng sarcomere? It is by the presence of Z disc or Z line. So, magmula dito sa Z disc na to, hanggang dito sa Z disc na to, yan ay isang sarcomere. Okay, so para mas maintindihan natin, bilangin natin kung ilan ang sarcomere dito sa illustration na to. So, from here, this is your Z disc, up to here, Z disc, so isang sarcomere yan. So, meaning to say, 1. Mula dito hanggang dito, 2. Mula dito hanggang dito, 3. Mula dito hanggang dito, 4. And then, mula dito hanggang dito, 5. Hanggang sa last natin is 6. So, all in all, sa illustration natin, meron tayong 6 na sarcomere. So, again, it is a structural and functional unit of the skeletal muscle. Aside from that, your sarcomere includes an A band and half of the contiguous I band. Okay, so this is your A band. Tama? Ito yung sarcomere nyo eh. From Z disc to the second Z disc, no? So, from this one to this one, sabi dito, ang sarcomere daw ay binubuo ng isang A band and then, sa bawat side, kalahating I band na lang. Bakit kalahating I band? Kasi, ang kalahating I band ay nandun na sa susunod na sarcomere. Ito yung I band mo, di ba? So, ang mahati dyan is Z disc. So, ano lang ang kabilang sa sarcomere mo? Kalahati nito. Ayan. Kalahati lang din ito. Okay? I hope na naiintindihan nyo, no? Yung ating illustration. Ayan. So, again, kaya sinabi doon, includes an A band, this one, the darker band, and half of the two contiguous I band. One on the other side, and one on this side. Okay? Next, we have the H-zone na nasa gitna ng sarcomere. So, ito yung H-zone na tinatawag. At sa H-zone ay hinahati ito ng M-line. M-line. So, sa H-zone, ang H-zone natin ay hinahati ng M-line. So, ngayon, palakihin na natin yung sarcomere na to. Pag-usapan na natin kung ano yung mga components ng sarcomere. Okay, so, from this one, focus na kayo dito sa pinalaking sarcomere. Okay? So, back to basic tayo. Sabi natin, ang sarcomere ay binubuo ng isang A band at kalahating I band. Okay? Kalahati lang. From here to here. Kasi, ang boundary natin sa isang sarcomere ay ang Z disc. So, meaning to say, from here to here lang ang ating sarcomere. Okay. So, kung mapapansin ninyo, meron kayong napapansin na dilaw na myofilament. Ito yung tinatawag nating thick myofilament. Itong thick myofilament na to, ito yung myosin na i-discuss natin mamaya. Ito namang thin filaments na to, ito naman yung tinatawag natin na actin. Yan, ito yung actin. At itong parang mga spring-like domains. Ang tawag naman natin dito ay titin. Titin. Okay? So again, you have your myosin, the thick myofilament, and the actin or the thin myofilament. Okay? So let's talk about actin myofilaments. Actin myofilaments. Ito, thin, actin. So the free ends are attached to the Z line. So, free ends daw ng thin filament na are attached to the Z line. Ito, no? So, ito yung end nung thin filament or the actin. And then, this is your Z disc or Z line. Okay? Then, towards the A band up to the edge of the H zone. Ito yung edge ng H zone eh. Ito yung H zone. Yung gitna ng H zone ay M line. Okay? So, again, the actin myofilaments, the free ends are attached to the Z line, this one, then towards the A band, okay? But up to the edge of H zone. So, ito yung H zone. Ito yung A band. Yung haba ng myosin, that is the area of A band. Next. Okay. It is composed of F-actin, tropomyosin, and troponin complex. Palakihin natin yung actin and myosin. Yan. So, from this one, yan. So, your thin filaments is composed of tropomyosin, G-actin, F-actin, troponin, and calcium binding sites. So, myosin and binding site. Okay. So, yung two regulatory protein ng thin filament ay ang tropomyosin and troponin. Ulitin ko ha. The two regulatory protein in thin filaments, you have tropomyosin and troponin. So, sa troponin, meron tayong iba't ibang types. You have the troponin T, troponin C, and troponin I. Okay? Now, yung end ng thin filament or the actin na naka-attach sa Z-disc, ang protein involved dyan is your actinin. Okay? Your alpha-actinin. Okay? Ulitin ko ha. Yung protein that is responsible for the attachment of actin to the Z-disc is the alpha-actinin. And last, for actin, ang kanyang haba ay around 1.0 micrometer and ang wide or ang diameter ng ating actin myofilament ay 8 nanometer wide. Okay? So, 1.0 micrometer long and 8 nanometer wide. Next is your myosin or the thick myofilaments. So, based naman muna tayo sa size ng thick myofilament. So, based on the size, it is around 1.6 micrometer long. Ito, mula dito hanggang dito, around 1.6 micrometer long. And then, ang kanyang lapad ay around 15 nanometer. Kaya nga, tinawag siya na thick myofilaments. So, it is bound to proteins of M-line. Ito yung M-line natin. May proteins yan. At dun nakabound yung ating yung myosin myofilaments natin. And to the Z-disc by a large protein called titin. So, asan yung titin natin? Itong parang spring type na ito. Ito yung nagko-connect dun sa dulo ng myosin papunta dun sa Z-disc. So, this is a protein which we called as titin. Okay? So, myosin myofilaments consist of many myosin bundles together along their rod-like tail with their heads exposed and direct towards a thin filaments. Okay? So, asan yung mga tinutukoy natin dyan? Ito. Yung mga nakapalibot. Yung mga myosin heads. So, ito yung nagbabind dun sa thin filaments natin during contraction. Okay? So, this is the normal state. So, kapag may contraction, ang mangyayari, itong ating thin filaments ay mag-i-slide or magpupunta towards the direction of M-line. Gigitna siya during contraction or during movement. But in resting phase, ganito lang siya. Malayo. Alright? So, ang tawag natin doon is the sliding mechanism or sliding filament mechanism, wherein the actin filaments slide past the myosin filaments towards the center of the sarcomere. The H zone becomes narrow and may be obliterated. I band also becomes narrow and A band remains constant during relaxation and contraction. Okay? So, ito yung sliding mechanism na tinatawag natin. During relaxed state, ganyan siya, yung thin filaments natin ay nandito nakalagay. So, both sides, no? Pero during contraction, ano nangyayari? Nag-slide to papunta sa gitna. Tingnan nyo. Ito. Yan, during contraction. Alright? And also, lumiliit yung, or nagnanarrow yung H zone, and also the I band becomes narrow. But, the A band remains the same. Either contraction or relaxed state, remains the same siya. Okay? So, I hope na-gets nyo yun, no? During contraction, nagkakaroon ng movement ng thin filament towards the center, papunta sa M line, no? So, from here, the relaxed state, during contraction, is magmo-move siya towards the center. The A band remains the same. Okay? So, that is the sliding filament mechanism. Next is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarcoplasmic reticulum corresponds to the endoplasmic reticulum of other cell types. So, yung tawag pala sa endoplasmic reticulum pag sa muscle is sarcoplasmic reticulum. Ang tawag naman sa cytoplasm is sarcoplasm. Ang tawag sa cell membrane is sarcolemma. Okay? So, your sarcoplasmic reticulum consists of membrane-bound sarcotubules that forms a canalicular network around each myofibrils. It devoid of ribosomes, meaning to say it is free from ribosomes. The site of sequestration of calcium during muscle relaxation and for release into the sarcoplasm of free calcium ions that triggers contraction in response to a nerve impulse. So yun ang pinaka-function ni sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sequestration of calcium. Okay? Next, the major characteristics, major types of skeletal muscle fibers. So we have different types of fibers that can be identified in skeletal muscle. So for the differentiation of the muscle types or muscle fiber types in the skeletal muscle, we have two criteria. No? Number one, their maximal rate of contraction. Is it fast or slow? And pangalawa, the major pathway of ATP synthesis. So ulitin ko, no, para natin ma-differentiate yung type of muscle fibers or skeletal muscle fibers, you need to consider the maximal rate of contraction. Is it fast or is it slow? And the major pathway of ATP synthesis. For ATP synthesis, meron tayong dalawa, no? Oxidative phosphorylation or glycolysis. Okay? So for the types of skeletal muscle fibers, meron tayong tatlo. Type 1 or the slow red oxidative fibers, type 2A or the fast intermediate oxidative glycolytic fibers, and type 2B or the fast white glycolytic fibers. So para mas maintindihan natin, meron tayo ditong table 10-2, the major characteristics of skeletal muscle fibers. Okay. So in terms of mitochondria, the presence of mitochondria sa slow or type 1 numerous, sa type 2A numerous din, and type 2B sparse. Capillaries numerous, sparse sa type 2B. Okay? So basahin nyo na lang ito. Now, for the type 1 or slow red oxidative fibers, many mitochondria, abundant myoglobin, oxidative phosphorylation of fatty acid. So, meaning to say, ang ATP synthesis nito ay oxidative phosphorylation. For slow continuous contraction for prolonged periods such as postural muscles at the back. Type 2A, many mitochondria, presence of myoglobin and glycogen, both oxidative and anaerobic glycolysis. So this is a combination of oxidative and glycolysis. For rapid contraction, and short bursts of activity such as athletes. Next type of muscle is your cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle is also considered as striated, but it differs from skeletal because it is involuntary. Meaning to say, hindi natin kayang patigilin ang pagtibok ng inyong mga puso. Okay? So, thickest layer of the heart, the myocardium. So, the muscle fibers of the cardiac muscle are branching. So, gaya nga na sinabi ko sa inyo, dun sa unang illustration, ayan, si skeletal muscle, single lang siya, no? At ang orientation niya is dire-diretso lang. But kay cardiac muscle, nagkakaroon ng branching ng muscle fibers. Okay? So, yun yung kaibahan nila. Alright. Balik tayo. So, generally, it have single nucleus per cell. So, the nucleus in the cardiac muscle is centrally located. Kapag skeletal, peripheral. No? Sa periphery natin makikita yung nucleus. And multinucleated pag skeletal. Pag cardiac, single lang. So, the nucleus is considered as ovoid. Nucleus are centrally located, unlike the skeletal muscle. Cross striation shows moderate variation in the size of muscle fiber. Next, aside from that, each cell is joined end-to-end by a surface specialization called intercalated disc. So, intercalated disc. So, ito yung boundary line, no? Or ito yung nagdudugtong sa bawat muscle cell sa cardiac muscle tissue natin. Okay? This is distinct, no? Or ito yung pinaka marker natin, no? For cardiac muscle, the presence of intercalated disc. So, the function of intercalated disc, number one, maintain firm cohesion of successive cellular units of the myocardium. Aside from that, it transmits the pull of one contractile unit to the next cellular unit along the long axis of myofibrils. So, cardiac muscle are fine longitudinal striation and transverse striations are also found, same as the skeletal muscle. Sarcomere is also the structural and functional unit of the cardiac muscle. So, as we all know, your sarcomere, you have the thick and thin myofilaments, as we discussed in the skeletal muscle. So, they are the same though. No? The component fibers have inherent atomicity and rhythmicity. That is why it is involuntary. Myofibrils closely resemble to those of the skeletal muscle. Sarcoplasmic reticulum is present but not as highly developed as the skeletal muscle. So, may napapansin ba kayo dito? Yung mga na-discuss din natin during epithelial tissue. Desmosome and the gap junctions. No? Present din dito sa ating cardiac muscle fiber. Okay? So, we have this so-called Purkinje myocytes. Ano ba itong Purkinje myocytes na to? These are modified cardiac muscle fibers that are specialized for impulse conduction. So, for impulse conduction. So, it is located in sinoatrial node at the junction of the superior vena cava with the right atrium and atrioventricular node at the lower part of the intraatrial septum, and the internodal tracts and the bundle of His. And last type of muscle tissue is the smooth muscle. For the smooth muscle, it is non-striated and involuntary. It is capable of slow, sustained, resistant to fatigue and contraction. The muscle fiber is structural and functional unit. Okay? So, kung si smooth muscle, the muscle fiber is the structural and functional unit. Si cardiac and skeletal muscle, the structural and functional unit are the sarcomere. Alright? So, smooth muscle fiber, fusiform or spindle shape. fusiform. Pag sinabi natin fusiform, thick dito sa center and then pagpunta or going to the terminal ends, nagkakaroon ng pagnipis or pagnarrow. Yan ang tinatawag nating fusiform or spindle shape. Okay? Elongated nucleus situated in their widest central portion. So, centrally located ang kanilang nucleus. Vary in their length in different organs. So, it varies from 20 micrometer up to 500 micrometer in pregnant women. No? Nag-enlarge yung uterus. So, mag-enlarge din yung cell or smooth muscle fibers. Okay. So, when in bundles or in extensive layers, individual fibers are offset such as that the wide portion of the cell are adjacent to the thin and tapering end of the neighboring cell. So this is the central portion of the cell. Pagka-adjacent daw, yung pinaka-end or yung ending nung isa pang adjacent cell ay located dito sa center nung kanyang katabing cell. So ganyan yung orientation niya. Okay? So next, in transverse section, smooth muscle appear as a mosaic or irregular polygons of varying sizes, with nuclei found only in the larger cross section. There are three kinds of filaments involved in the smooth muscle fiber. We have the thin actin filaments, around 4 to 8 micrometer in diameter, which consists of F-actin and calmodulin insert into dense bodies. The thicker myosin filaments, which is 15 nanometer in diameter, and we have the so-called intermediate filaments, which are 10 nanometer, generally contain desmin. Rudimentary sarcoplasmic reticulum. The teeth tubules are absent in the smooth muscle fiber. During contraction, the borders of the cell become scalloped and the nucleus distorted. So, location of smooth muscle fibers or the smooth muscle tissue. Walls of the digestive tract from the middle of the esophagus to the anal sphincter. Walls of the respiratory tract from the trachea to the alveolar ducts. Walls of the blood vessels. Walls of the ducts of the glands. Arrector pili, muscle found in the hair bulb of the skin. Areola of the mammary gland. Subcutaneous tissue of the scrotum, urinary bladder, and the uterus. So those are the location where you can find the smooth muscle tissue. So again, recap tayo. We have three histological classification of muscle tissue, namely the skeletal, the cardiac, and the smooth muscle. For the functional classification, we have voluntary and involuntary. And for structural classification, we have the striated and non-striated type. Okay? Now, the functional unit of your skeletal muscle fiber and cardiac muscle fiber are your sarcomere. For the structural and functional unit of your smooth muscle fiber, that is the smooth muscle fiber itself. We have the thick filaments, or what we know as myosin, and the thin filaments as what we know as the actin. Okay? So I hope meron kayong natutunan dito sa discussion natin ngayon. And if you have questions, feel free to ask during our live session. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.